She walked into the office and was told to go through the back door, but when her husband walked in minutes later, as the new CEO, the entire room fell silent. What happened next exposed the quiet bias hiding in plain sight. It was 8:30 a.m. on a chilly Monday morning in downtown Chicago. The city buzzed with the energy of a new workweek, horns honked, steam rose from manhole covers, and polished shoes clicked hurriedly on the pavement. Among the tide of sharply dressed professionals rushing into steel and glass high-rises was Janice Carter. Janice was confident, prepared, and early. She had chosen her outfit with care, a tailored gray suit, a white blouse with soft pleats, and modest black heels. In her hand, she carried a leather-bound file folder, filled with briefing documents and the final draft of a strategic proposal she had spent months crafting. Her brown skin glowed against the morning light. Her short, natural curls were perfectly shaped. Her posture was upright, dignified. Because she knew she had earned her place at the table. She walked into the towering lobby of Allen & Rhodes Consulting, one of the most prestigious corporate strategy firms in the country. The kind of place that helped reshape billion-dollar brands. The kind of place where people assumed power only looked a certain way. As the revolving door spun behind her, the marble floor gleamed under her feet. The silence in the lobby was pristine, broken only by the soft clicking of keyboards at the front desk. Janice headed straight for the reception counter, ready to check in. But before she could speak, the receptionist, a white woman in her late 30s with a stiff, practiced smile, glanced up, narrowed her eyes, and said the words that would hang in Janice's memory like an echo. "Ma'am, deliveries go around the back." Janice froze. Her brain took a moment to register what she had just heard. Deliveries? She blinked once, politely, and responded with poise. "I'm not with a delivery service. I have an appointment." There was no apology from the receptionist. No embarrassment, no realization of the mistake. Just a quick once-over of Janice's appearance and a tight nod, as if conceding nothing more than a misunderstanding. Before Janice could proceed, she felt a brisk breeze pass her shoulder, followed by a slight shove. A man in a navy blue suit, nose high in the air and coffee in hand, brushed past her without so much as a glance. "Excuse me," he said flatly, not slowing down. "You're standing in the way." Janice took a step back, startled more by his indifference than the contact. He hadn't acknowledged her as a person. To him, she was simply in the way. An obstacle. Invisible, or worse, unworthy. She steadied herself. These weren't isolated incidents. They were all too familiar. Not rage-filled or loud, but subtle. Quiet dismissals. The kind that whisper, "You don't belong here." She had been skirted. Not by accident, but by unconscious bias. Passed over without a second thought. Her competence ignored, her presence questioned, her space invaded. Janice inhaled slowly and looked around. The lobby was bustling now, with men in tailored suits talking in clusters, women in heels striding across the floor with iced coffees and ID badges swinging from their necks. No one else seemed to be stopped or questioned. No one else seemed to be in the way. Her grip tightened on the folder in her hand. Inside it was a 42-page strategic growth plan, a plan that had already been praised by the company's internal team and requested by the board. She wasn't here by accident. She hadn't stumbled in. She had been invited. She was overqualified, if anything. But still, she had to prove it. Again. Taking a breath, she moved to the elevator bank and pressed the button. As she waited, her mind swirled with a cocktail of emotions, anger, disappointment, resolve. How many other women, black women, had stood in this exact position, holding their value in their hands, only to be unseen? The elevator dinged. She stepped in, refusing to let the experience shake her core. But deep down, she knew the moment was more than just offensive. It was a symptom of a deeper issue, an unspoken culture of exclusion masked behind professionalism and polished glass doors. This was the kind of place where your suit didn't matter as much as your skin. Where your qualifications could be buried beneath assumptions the second you stepped inside. And yet, Janice wasn't here to fit in, she was here to lead. The elevator doors closed. She was going up, to the 29th floor. To the boardroom. Where she would not just sit at the table. She would change the tone of the room. As the elevator doors slid open on the 29th floor, Janice stepped out into a hallway lined with framed success stories, photos of leadership retreats, glossy portraits of executives, and glowing quotes about innovation and excellence. The company's branding was everywhere. It was proud of its power. But Janice wasn't here to admire the walls. She was here for business. She approached the security checkpoint outside the executive meeting wing and reached into her bag for her ID. A tall, stone-faced security guard stood behind a podium with a printed guest list. Janice offered her identification with a polite smile. "I'm here for the strategy briefing," she said, "Conference Room B." The guard took her ID and gave it a brief glance, then looked at his list. He frowned. "Your name isn't on here," he said flatly. Janice leaned slightly forward. "It should be. I was invited by the strategy team last week. My name is Janice Carter." He looked again, slower this time, flipping through the pages as if doing her a favor. Not seeing it. "I have the email confirmation," she said, reaching for her phone. He cut her off with a raised hand. "You'll need to wait until I confirm." Then, as if on cue, two sharply dressed men arrived behind her. Both white. Both laughing about last night's game. Without asking for ID, the security guard smiled at them and waved them through. "Gentlemen," he nodded. They didn't even notice Janice. They breezed past, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne and the sound of belonging. Janice stood awkwardly in the lobby's corner, unsure whether to sit, stand, or simply disappear. She could feel it, eyes drifting toward her, then away, then back again. Quiet murmurs. Lips moving behind coffee cups. People pretending to check their phones while sneaking glances at her from behind glass partitions. She was dressed like them. Carried herself like them. But the room responded to her like she was other. An anomaly in a space designed to feel exclusive. Minutes dragged. 5. 7. 10. No one approached her. No one offered assistance. Even the receptionist she had passed downstairs now stood nearby whispering with someone else, throwing the occasional glance in Janice's direction. Janice's phone buzzed. A message from the lead strategist. "See you in Room B. We're starting soon." She showed it to the guard, who finally nodded. "Go ahead." No apology. No explanation. Just a lazy gesture toward the conference hallway. She walked through the frosted glass doors and followed the signs toward Conference Room B, heels clicking against the polished floors. As she reached the door, she paused, straightened her posture, fixed her sleeve, and braced herself. The room was full. About 15 people seated around a U-shaped table, others standing near the presentation screen. A low hum of conversation filled the space, mixed with the clatter of laptops and the occasional laugh. She stepped inside. The room didn't go silent. It didn't gasp. But there was a subtle shift. A few heads turned. One man raised an eyebrow. A woman narrowed her eyes, quickly scanning Janice from head to toe, trying to determine why she was there. No one greeted her. No one stood to offer help. Someone moved their coffee slightly as she walked past, as though avoiding an unknown variable. She found an empty seat near the back corner, behind the main table. Not quite part of the discussion, but not entirely outside the room either. She placed her folder gently on the desk, sat down, and waited. Still no one said a word to her. She scanned the room. Most of these people she had never met, but they were all about to present a plan she had co-authored. Her ideas were printed on those very slides. Her research supported every growth prediction. Her late nights had fueled the data that now sat on their screens. And yet, in this room, she was invisible. A man at the table leaned toward another and whispered something while glancing her way. They both smiled tightly. Janice looked down at her notes, pretending not to notice. But she noticed everything. She didn't feel nervous. She felt insulted. But she also felt something deeper, clarity. She had never expected open arms or red carpets. But she had expected professionalism. Respect. A basic acknowledgement of her presence. Instead, she was treated like a footnote. And yet, she stayed calm. Because what they didn't know was that the man they were all waiting for, the one set to become their new CEO, was not just the company's next leader. He was Janice's husband. And this meeting? It was about to become something no one in that room would ever forget. The fluorescent lights in conference room cast a cold glow over the table as the presentation began. A senior associate walked to the front of the room and clicked the remote, revealing the first slide, Strategic Restructuring and Future Growth Opportunities. The title looked impressive in blue and white, but Janice had seen it a dozen times before, because she had written it. Not just the title. The entire presentation. The financial modeling, the expansion map, the restructuring flowchart, all of it had her fingerprints on it. She had worked late nights, skipping dinners and weekend rest, to craft a plan that would breathe new life into this firm. And now, she sat at the edge of the room, treated as though she were just another silent observer. The presenter spoke confidently, using buzzwords that bounced off the walls like tennis balls in a glass box: synergy, agility, scalability. Everyone nodded in agreement, even when the content was surface level. They weren't there to debate. They were there to align. Janice, meanwhile, remained still. Her eyes scanned the room with quiet sharpness. No one had introduced her. No one had even acknowledged her presence. It wasn't just disrespect. It was deliberate. In a room full of polished suits and ego-driven managers, there was no room for someone they had already decided didn't belong, especially someone they assumed had no power. A young man across the table smirked as he tapped away on his phone. His colleague leaned over and whispered, not as quietly as he thought. "I think she's here for HR compliance." The other snorted. "Or maybe legal. You know, damage control. Diversity hire, maybe?" They both chuckled softly, clearly amused by their own ignorance. Janice heard every word. Her pulse ticked slightly faster, but she showed no emotion. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone, not here. Not now. Instead, she pulled out a pen and quietly jotted a note in the corner of her folder. Not because she needed to take notes, but because she needed to stay grounded. She needed to stay composed. She remembered what her grandmother used to say: "Don't raise your voice. Raise your value." So she sat still, with dignity, like a storm in waiting. As the presenter continued through the strategy slides, highlighting projections, talking about market penetration, even pointing to a graph Janice herself had built in Excel, no credit was given. Not even a passing, "Thanks to our advisory team." It wasn't that they forgot. It was that they didn't think it mattered. To them, she wasn't the architect. She was an extra. Suddenly, a knock echoed from the glass door. A young woman in business casual leaned in, her voice low but clear. "The new CEO has arrived. He'll be joining us shortly." The air changed instantly. The two men who had been whispering straightened their ties in unison. A senior partner closed his laptop and adjusted his cufflinks. Someone cleared their throat loudly, as if rehearsing how to sound confident. Janice could almost taste the shift. Gone were the smirks and chuckles. Now there was a scramble, silent but unmistakable, to look sharp, sound smart, and sit taller. A woman in a cream blazer leaned toward another and whispered, "I heard he's coming from a private equity firm. Big numbers. Global exposure." "I heard he's ex-McKinsey," someone replied. "Harvard MBA, too." Janice smiled to herself, just a little. Harvard MBA. Yes. That part was true. The room was buzzing now. Phones were silenced, documents straightened, water glasses sipped. It was like watching a stage crew prepare for the entrance of a lead actor. And Janice? She remained exactly where she was, unbothered. She knew what was coming. She knew that in just a few seconds, this room was going to flip on its head. But she wasn't going to steal the moment. She had already earned it. Let them sweat. Let them scramble. Because the man they were about to meet wasn't just another corporate savior. He was Marcus Green. And he was her husband. The double doors at the far end of the room opened with a soft click. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Chairs creaked as people shifted slightly to get a better view. There was an unspoken expectation, a sense that whoever walked through that door was about to change the energy in the room. And then he appeared. A tall black man stepped inside. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that molded perfectly to his frame. His shoes were polished to a quiet shine. Every movement he made was composed yet powerful. His face was calm, clean-shaven, and unmistakably confident. This was a man who didn't need to speak to command attention. His presence did the talking. He paused just long enough for everyone to take him in. Then, with deliberate ease, he scanned the room, eyes moving from face to face. Some smiled politely. Others looked away, suddenly unsure of how to act. No one wanted to be caught looking too eager, or too uncomfortable. But instead of heading to the head of the table, the man turned and walked toward the back corner of the room. Straight toward Janice. Murmurs rippled across the room. Janice didn't stand up. She didn't need to. Her expression was composed, her hands folded neatly on her lap. When he reached her, he smiled, the kind of smile that carried warmth, familiarity, and pride. Then, in front of the stunned room, he leaned down and gently kissed her on the cheek. "Thank you for holding it down, love," he said softly. Gasps. Not loud ones. Not theatrical. But real, human reactions, barely concealed shock. A few people blinked in confusion. A couple cleared their throats and looked down, pretending to straighten papers that didn't need straightening. One woman actually dropped her pen. The man straightened up and turned back toward the boardroom. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice smooth, steady, and unmistakably authoritative. "I'm Marcus Green, your new CEO." The energy in the room shifted like a tremor. Suddenly, everyone was listening. The same people who had spent the last hour half distracted were now locked in. Every eye was on him. Every breath was held just a little tighter. Marcus continued. "Before we get into the presentation, I want to introduce someone very important." He turned and gestured toward Janice. "This is my wife, Janice Green." Dead silence. Not the kind that invited response, but the kind that demanded reflection. "She's not just my partner in life," Marcus said. "She's the reason this company is turning around. She designed the strategy you're reading. The projections. The market entry plan. The restructuring map. That was all her." A few people blinked in disbelief, shifting awkwardly in their chairs. "And yes," Marcus added, letting the pause hang in the air, "she was in this room long before I got here." He let that land. "So if you ignored her, disrespected her, or assumed she didn't belong," he said, his voice now carrying a firmer tone, "then congratulations. You've already failed your first leadership test. No one dared speak. The room was frozen in a blend of shock, guilt, and quiet admiration. A few of the younger staff looked mortified. Others looked down at the table, pretending to take notes while their ears burned with embarrassment. The two men who had whispered about Janice earlier now sat stiffly, eyes fixed on the table like schoolboys caught cheating on a test. Janice, still seated, raised her chin slightly, not with arrogance, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had been seen. Really seen. She didn't need to speak. Her silence said everything. Marcus let the room sit in it for a moment longer, then added with calm finality. This company talks a lot about innovation. About being future-ready. But if we can't recognize brilliance when it's right in front of us, regardless of gender, race, or status, then we're not ready for any future worth leading. He turned and made his way to the head of the table. Let's begin. As he sat down, every pair of eyes shifted back to Janice, not with judgment, but with something new, recognition. For the first time all morning, she was no longer invisible. She was the standard. Marcus took a moment to let the room breathe. Silence stretched across the table, not an empty silence, but a heavy, reflective one. Some lowered their eyes, others sat frozen in place, unsure whether to nod, to speak, or to simply shrink into their seats. Then he spoke again, this time, more deliberately. We talk about diversity, Marcus said, and we talk about inclusion. But let me be very clear, today, I watched some of you do the exact opposite. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. There was something more piercing in his calm. My wife is a black woman. She holds 2 MBAs, from institutions most of you would brag about if you'd even gotten in. She has led cross-continental teams. She's closed multi-million-dollar mergers. She has advised Fortune 500 firms on how to restructure their entire operation, and today, she authored the very strategy we're here to discuss. He turned to look at each person slowly. No one met his eyes for long. And yet, he continued, pausing, this morning, she was almost blocked at the door. Questioned. Ignored. Misjudged. She was treated like an outsider in a room she helped build. The weight of his words hit the table like iron. If that's how you treat someone who looks like her, someone qualified, composed, and here for a reason, then I promise you, there's a lot of unlearning this organization still needs to do. And under my leadership, we will do that work. No one spoke. Even the rustling of papers had stopped. One man attempted to clear his throat, almost as if to apologize, but the moment swallowed him whole. Words failed. Then, in the quiet, Janice stood. She didn't rush. She didn't stumble. She rose like someone who knew the room had finally caught up with her worth. Her voice, when it came, was calm. Steady. Strong. I don't need apologies, she said, glancing around at the faces that had once dismissed her. I need accountability. The words sliced through the tension like a blade. I need people in this company who recognize talent when they see it, regardless of skin color, gender, hairstyle, or accent. I need a culture where being different doesn't mean being invisible. She paused. The room was still. Today, some of you saw me and made assumptions. You saw my skin, not my skill. You noticed my presence, but not my purpose. And that's not just about me. That's about every person who walks into this firm and wonders if they'll be seen for who they are, or pushed aside before they even speak. You could hear the breath catch in a few throats. Then came the applause. Hesitant at first, an awkward, nervous clapping from the far end of the table. Then more joined in, and within seconds, the room erupted in uneven applause. Some clapped out of guilt. Others out of admiration. A few just followed along. Janice nodded politely but didn't smile. Because she knew the difference between applause and awareness. After the meeting adjourned, the transformation began, at least on the surface. People approached her. Too many, too quickly. Outstretched hands, overeager smiles, compliments that sounded rehearsed. "You were incredible. I'm so sorry for how this morning went. I had no idea." She accepted their words with grace. She shook hands, nodded, even exchanged a few business cards. But she remembered. She remembered who had rolled their eyes when she entered. Who whispered. Who texted under the table and smirked in her direction. She remembered the receptionist's tight-lipped glance, the security guard's cold indifference, and the way the room went on without her, as if her presence was an interruption instead of a contribution. Janice didn't hold grudges. But she never forgot. Because remembering wasn't about resentment, it was about clarity. Clarity about who would need coaching. Who needed to be challenged. And who might never change, no matter how many diversity seminars they attended. That day, Janice didn't just prove that she belonged in the room. She reminded everyone that true power doesn't need to announce itself. It walks in, stands tall, and speaks when it chooses. She showed them that leadership doesn't wear just one face, one color, or one gender. And as she left that conference room, file in hand, shoulders back, she didn't just walk away with the satisfaction of being recognized. She walked away knowing she had reshaped the culture of an entire company without even raising her voice.